Okay, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Kevin, for that overview. I am going to be presenting work done at the Economic Research Service with Nigel Key and Chris Burns as well. It's a report that was released in February looking at farm household income volatility, and towards the end I'll have a link to download the report if you're interested. So the basic story here is Kevin just did a nice job showing the fluctuations in terms of sector level farm income or net cash income. That gives a good sense of the profitability of the entire farm sector, and we rightly pay a lot of attention to those swings. But actually, the individual farm businesses and the households that operate those farm businesses experience much greater swings from year to year. And understanding that, I think, is important and valuable. And it varies depending on what type of household, what type of production they have or production contract they might have. And it matters, I think, for maybe two main reasons that we'll touch on here. One, the households that operate these farms are reliant on that income for the well-being of the household. Volatile income is difficult to plan for. It can have adverse effects on the well-being of the households. So we want to understand that, in part because there are government programs that are designed to counteract fluctuations in farm income. And I would say over the last 5 years, we've seen an increased focus from farm programs in that direction, moving away, for instance, from direct payments and towards things like ARC, PLC, or crop insurance subsidies. So before we get into it, it's worth looking at why is farm income so volatile. It's certainly more volatile than my income or most of the people in this room. And that's because of the different type of risks that farm households and farm businesses experience. So one thing is business risk, the types of input price fluctuations or output price fluctuations. Trade negotiations can change, as we've seen in recent days. We have production risk, so things like diseases or blights, pest infestations for crops. We also see changes in government policies. These happen over a slightly longer time frame, but the Farm Bill is heating up for the next round, and we'll likely see some change. I don't know what they are, but it will be a little bit different in 2020 than it was in 2010. Farm households also tend to participate in the off-farm economy, the non-farm economy, and they're subject to the types of non-farm recessions or local labor market conditions that can either make it more attractive or less attractive to work off of the farm. So now let me describe a little bit about the study. Some of you may be familiar with the Agricultural Resource Management Survey, or ARMS. It's an annual survey undertaken by two agencies within ERS, or within USDA, the Economic Research Service and NASS, the National Agricultural Statistical Service. And it's a survey that we operate every year. The sample size in recent years has been around 20,000, but it varies. And it was not designed as a panel survey, but at the same time we see some farms and associated farm households that are surveyed in multiple years. So what does this look like? So this is all of the ARMS observations from 1996 to 2013, a total of about 229,000 different completed surveys. And most of those, the great majority, were surveyed just once. But we see a number of repeat observations, some 29,000 farms surveyed twice, over 6,000 surveyed 3 times. And in order to create the data set that I'll be showing you results from, we matched those observations where an individual farm and farm household was surveyed more than once. We restricted it to times when they were surveyed within 5 years of one another, and we used that to create a panel data set. an unbalanced panel, but it is largely representative of commercial farm households. That is, commercial farm operations that are farm operations with more than $350,000 in gross cash farm income. There's much more detail in the report on exactly how the data set was constructed. So when we talk about farm household income, it's useful, I think, to go over the major components. There are two major components, the on-farm and off-farm income. Looking at on-farm income first, the majority of that for most farm households is that farm business income to the household. And that's the net cash farm income that Kevin was describing, the profits from the farm, and most households operating a farm will receive some or all of those profits, and it'll comprise their household income. There may be other types of farm income from, for instance, renting out farmland, from doing custom work, or in the case of a corporation, from wages paid. The other major component is off-farm income, and we've split this into two categories, earned and unearned income. Earned income is things from salary or wages or from operating a business. Unearned income are things like interest and dividends, which, especially for larger farms, they may have significant assets from which they're earning income. So I'd like to show, before we get into the analysis of volatility, just some sort of descriptive graphs of what farm household income looks like between the two periods. So we've matched two different surveys that went to the same farm household, and this is showing the change in income for households that earned between $75,000 and $125,000 in the first period. And what we can see is that it's really variable. So that big peak in the middle is about 40% of households earned in that same income band. In the second period, they earned between $75,000 and $125,000. But for 60%, actually their income swing was greater than that. And as you can see, the tails of this distribution, we have a number of farms where their income swing was over $100,000 or even over $200,000 between the two periods. This changes as we look at different first period income for the farm household. So this shows three distributions based on the first period income. So that highest line shows a first period income between $0 and $75,000, and we see that they earned a little more than maybe $50,000 in the second period on average, with some distribution around that. But as first period income increases, both the average income in the second period and the variability of that income both go up. So as we see households getting richer, we also see increased volatility. This next graph shows that this holds true as well for underlying farm assets. So these are roughly equivalent to the quartiles of assets held by farm households within our sample. And the story here is that as the amount of farm assets increase, the business income increases, but so does the variability of income. That solid line at the bottom are farm households with over $3 million in farm assets, and we can see really quite a large distribution of income change in income over the two periods. When we set out to look at income volatility for farm households and look at the literature, one of the things that differs for farm households is that they frequently experience negative income in at least one of the periods. This actually is not true. Most of the non-farm household studies on income volatility just look at positive income, because most people's income is positive. But I think about 1 in 6 commercial farms experiences a loss in any given year. And so we designed these, or borrowed, I should say, these 2 measures, the absolute arc percent change, which is basically just the absolute value of arc percent change, and the same thing with the coefficient of variation. And these 2 measures capture the volatility between the 2 periods that we measure for each individual farm household. If we look at this, this is sort of another way of showing the change in assets, but it illustrates something that I think is worth noting. So in these graphs, the blue line is farm household income, and the red line, sorry, I should say the volatility of farm household income. The red line is the volatility of total household income. And what we see is as the farm operation becomes larger, as the assets held by the household, or the farm assets held by the household increase, those 2 lines come closer to each other. And total household income begins to match the volatility that we see in farm income, which is higher than that of off-farm income. So basically, the larger the operation that a household is running, the more of their income that comes from that farm operation, and the higher the volatility of the income for that household. I'm going to gloss over this a little bit because of time constraints, but if we compare this to non-farm households, our measures of income volatility to non-farm households, we see that really farm households experience significantly higher volatility. That second bullet is a nice illustration. About 9% of non-farm households have an income swing of 50% or more between 2 years, consecutive years in this case. 58% of farm households did. It's worth noting, though, that actually our measures are quite similar to income from other sorts of self-employment. So while farm income may be more volatile than non-farm wage income, it's similar to non-farm self-employment income. Okay. Let's skip over this as well and talk a little bit about income components. So the earlier chart that I showed showed the various types of income accruing to the farm household. And this breaks down those incomes in a covariance matrix showing, so it's a symmetrical table, net farm income, program payments or government payments, and then 2 types of off-farm income. We look at the upper left-hand cell of the table. This is showing that the variance of net farm income is about 107% of the variance of total household income experienced by the farm household. So if net farm income was the only type of income accruing to the household, their variability would actually be 107% of what it is. The reason that it's less is because farm income negatively covaries with other types of income that the household receives. So in particular, government programs are negatively correlated with farm income, and off-farm income also tends to lower that variability. When we look at this from the adding up these columns, about 77% of the variance of the household income comes from farm income, very little from program payments, and then about 20% from the 2 types of off-farm income. So the last thing that I'd like to do is look at one measure of how effective different types of payments are in terms of mitigating income volatility. And the way that we did this was through something called the certainty equivalent. Certainty equivalent basically says what's the amount of sure money that a household would be willing to receive that would be equal to sort of the risky income stream from something like farm income. So the formula for the certainty equivalent is in the top line. And the way that we look at how effective the programs are in terms of mitigating income volatility is to look at the certainty equivalent without the program payments and subtract it from the certainty equivalent with the program payments. This gives us a sense of how effective are these programs. So we restrict this to highly specialized crop farms. And if we look at that, the income on average without payments is $221,000. And so that's our baseline. If we look at direct payments, they have about a one-to-one correspondence. Direct payments are pretty much a sure thing. So each dollar is worth $1 in certainty equivalent terms, or about $1.01 in certainty equivalent terms. If we contrast this with net crop insurance payments, here the household receives about $6,000 in crop insurance payments, but in certainty equivalent terms, it was worth a little over $9,000. So that number at the bottom, each dollar received in crop insurance payments was worth about $1.38 in terms of utility to the household. And that's because crop insurance pays out when you have a bad year, when your farm income is likely to be lower. And in the middle, countercyclical payments also tend to do relatively well, better than direct payments, although not quite as effective as net crop insurance payments. So I am going to leave it there, but just to summarize, looking at our sample, which is representative of households operating commercial farms, we see that they have highly volatile incomes, more volatile than non-farm incomes. We see that this income is more volatile on large farms than it is on smaller ones. I didn't get into it, but education, being married, or working off farm tend to mitigate the volatility of household income. And although farm households have income from a lot of sources, about 77% of the total income variation is from farm income. So thanks a lot, and I've included a link to our report on this final slide here.